posted, online, so that this will be available for viewing for anyone who, was not able to come to the session. So I'm actually going to start with someone's joining us on the phone, and with a phone number of 8849 as the last 4 digits. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, it's Ryan Orr with Orr Partners. We're real estate developers.
Great, thank you. Andrea McPherson, want to say hello?
Hello, hello. I know some of you guys are quite familiar with me. I'm a co-chair with the Department of Mental Health, and I advocate for healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Taylor.
Bob Taylor, architect, Ocean Park resident.
Welcome.
Interested in the project.
CJ Laffer.
Hi, good morning. I'm CJ Laffer. I'm a land use attorney and partner at Harding Larmore in Santa Monica.
Great, welcome. Charles Duncombe.
Hi, Charles Duncombe, Executive Director of City Garage, and we're one of the arts tenants at Bergamot, and so we're very interested to learn what the city's plans are.
Great, welcome. Corey Taylor.
Hi, I'm Corey Taylor with VA Collective here in Santa Monica, an architect.
Great. George Gleason.
Hi, George Gleason with Orr Partners. Work with Ryan, we're developers.
Jason Perry.
Yes, hi everyone. Sunset Park resident, former planning commissioner, and currently serving as a trustee at New Road School, which is in the Bergamot plan area.
Cara Block.
Good morning, I'm Cara Block from DFH Architects.
Leila Taslimi.
Hi, excuse me, I was video muted while I'm making wraps for our children's lunches here at Untitled #1 Preschool. We are close to, excuse me, Bergamot, and enjoy accessing it for the train and the art galleries, and I wanted to listen in today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Leslie Lambert.
I'm Leslie Lambert, and I'm on the Planning Commission. I'm one of the Planning Commission delegates to the committee, whatever that means.
Thank you. Mario Fondo Bernardi. Mario?
You're muted, Mario.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I help to unmute maybe.
Yeah, Mario Bernardi, former planning commissioner and also editor of the Smart Column.
Thank you. Michael Roque.
Yeah, hi everyone. Michael Roque. I am a planner with Rand Pastor Nelson land use law firm.
Thank you. Paula Larmore.
I am a land use attorney partner with CJ.
And Sam Tolkien.
Sam, you're muted.
And is he able to unmute? I don't see him on the screen actually. Sam, are you able to unmute? Sam, I guess Sam's actually one of our other Planning Commission subcommittee members that had volunteered for the working groups as well. Okay, so that is everybody on the call. I hope I didn't miss anyone.
Did we get Judy Abdo?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss her on the list?
I guess so.
Judy, hi. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now, Sam. Yep.
I'm Sam Tolkien, and I'm Planning Commissioner and Architect.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that, Judy. I don't know how I missed you on the list.
Oh, it's easy. I'm Hi, I'm Judy Abdo, and I'm just curious about what is being discussed for Bergamot. I'm a former mayor and council member and OPA board member.
Perfect. Thank you and welcome. Okay. Have I covered everybody? I didn't miss anyone, right? If I did miss you, please feel free to unmute and speak up. Okay, great. Well, with that, again, welcome to everybody, and let's fire up the presentation. Stephanie, you want to share your screen?
Okay, just give me a moment. Just a second. Let's see, I will share. There we go. Can you see my screen?
There we go. Yep, we can see your screen. Thanks.
Okay.
So we have about 2 hours together today. We have this going till about 1 o'clock. And the purpose of today's working group session is we're going to be recapping some of the draft ideas and concepts for objective design standards in the Bergamot area plan. We'll have a particular focus on open space, so really thinking about those spaces between the buildings, and kind of, in thinking about the Bergamot area, and anticipation of more housing projects, trying to think about, livability in the neighborhood, in a different way than what it looks like today. We'll also be touching on ground floor design and building modulation, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. There's another planned working group in April 18th, so please hold that on your calendars as well. We're kind of letting the process lead us here, so if we do need another 1 or 2 of these, we're certainly open, to doing that, just based on kind of how the discussion and feedback goes today. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of background, the Bergamot Area Plan was adopted in 2013 with its, I would say, overall vision covering, and you can see the bottom right there, the area that it covers. It's about 140-acre area on either side of Olympic Boulevard. Roughly, the boundaries were Centinela on the east, let's say Colorado on the north, Cloverfield on the south, and kind of Exposition and the city yards on the southern end there. So this again encompasses about 140-acre area. The vision was really thinking about how to transform some former industrial areas, but also celebrate the creative arts that had kind of grown out, as part of the Bergamot area, and then how to then link that to, at the time, the coming of the expo train, and thinking about this as sort of the transit village, and you'll see that term used throughout the Bergamot area plan. And so there were policies and standards and guidelines that were meant to encourage this idea of like a mixed use transit village that had, I think its basic concept was at the time, through really encouraging development agreements and being able to negotiate for different things, given just the parcel size, that we're seeing. The sort of parcel sizes in Bergamot are pretty different than the rest of the city, and that speaks to sort of that, former industrial past. Fast forward 10 years, the plan probably hasn't really resulted in the transformation that was intended. I think some of the challenges that we have heard from all of the private property owners, is that the standards kind of aren't supporting, the kinds of redevelopment that they might be thinking about. We still have these big parcel sizes. So, we really haven't seen kind of any new development actually that's been governed by the rules of the Bergamot area plan. The 2 projects that have been built, you might be familiar, the Millennium East Village is a housing project on Colorado, and then there is a office building at Stewart and Colorado. Those were through development agreement that actually predated the Bergamot area plan. So there really hasn't been anything that's been constructed, that have been governed by the rules. So what this project seeks to do is to provide new objective design standards with an overall goal of simplifying the standards in the plan to make them more user-friendly, and also to provide more incentives for housing. As part of the housing element process, the height and FAR for housing projects was increased in the Bergamot area plan, and that was, what the city has committed to is, finding ways to continue and incentivize housing production in the Bergamot plan. And so you can see, the categories of objective design standards that are being developed to incentivize housing. And that's what's bringing us here today. And I'll turn it over now to Stephanie and Susan to walk through the presentation. So what we'll do is we'll go through the presentation and we will come back to some of the questions that we're asking and then ask for feedback from the group in order to guide the discussion. So Stephanie?
Thanks, Jing. Want to make sure everyone knows that these are still concepts and your feedback is really important to us as we move through the development of the plan. We're looking at the existing standards in the plan and also looking at other areas in the city, the downtown community plan standards, that is an area plan that is most recently that has been adopted in 2016. We've been hearing that those standards have worked. We do see a lot of new construction downtown, so we're using some of those standards to pull them over to the Bergamot area plan. As Jing was saying, because of the industrial nature, the parcel sizes are very large, and it's a really different type of area. The Bergamot area plan did identify 3 or 4 different areas within the plan, each one having its different character and development pattern that you could see in the upper right-hand side. We're thinking of simplifying the standards, finding a right size for all of the standards, and simplifying the standards throughout the area plan. As Jing mentioned, we're going to be focusing primarily today on open space. We believe open space and permeability through these larger parcels is essential to making it and transforming it into a livable neighborhood. So when we look at open space standards and what might be required on the site, we first look to what were the area plan standards to begin with. That's the chart up above. And then what are some other standards we can look towards? And so we're thinking that for the larger parcels, it might be helpful if the open space requirement might increase based on the parcel size. We do have that occurring in the downtown, and that is a precedent that was set in the Bergamot area plan as well. But we are opening that for questions. So should there be a requirement for open space that is based on the parcel size? Should it increase with the percentage increase with the parcel size? And should there be one primary open space that's a minimum of 6,000 square feet? The Bergamot area plan really envisioned, as Jing was saying, a transformational from this light industrial area with large parcels to mixed-use development and housing. We anticipate with the new zoning standards that transformation will likely occur. And so we want to make sure that the standards are simplified, that we get the housing that we want and the livable neighborhood that we want. The Bergamot area plan had some, we think, fairly stringent and complicated standards. This is a diagram for ground floor open space requiring a 40-foot by 40-foot minimum area and identified where it should be on the site. So one of the questions we have for the group is, should there be ground floor open space or open space that's required at grade at the ground floor, knowing that there may be subterranean parking underneath. And if there were ground floor open space required, should we locate it or require it to be located in view of the street or near the street? If that is a challenging requirement and it requires incentives, what incentives might make that work? And maximum building footprint is a requirement that dovetails with the ground floor open space requirement. We do have maximum building footprint standards in the Bergamot area plan. We also have that citywide. And so we're thinking that the maximum building footprint requirement may still be relevant. If it is relevant, what size of footprint would make sense? Would that be a 35,000 square foot footprint? Would that make sense for the entire plan area? Here we see the main streets within Bergamot on the left-hand side, and the wish list of pathways through parcels, different frontage types, in an idea for a shared street network with pedestrian and bicycle mobility. We understand that this plan is fairly complicated. While it was a really nice vision to have mobility throughout Bergamot, and that's still our goal. How can we achieve that with these new requirements? And AECOM and Susan Ambrosini has done some studies for us, so I'm going to turn it over to her for a bit to talk about the work that she's done looking at parcel sizes and permeability. Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So one of the things we have done is just take a look at the pathways, the shared street network that was proposed in the Bergamot plan, and kind of align it with what we're seeing on the ground today and where there still are pathway opportunities. As Stephanie mentioned, there hasn't been a lot of new development. So in general, the pathway opportunities are still there if desired. And so we wanted to better understand what are the parcel sizes potentially for new development or on existing parcels, and therefore is that a potential basis for requiring open space and or pathways at the ground level to improve the permeability of these larger blocks. So just for reference, this is an example of one of the blocks shown in the red circle on the left of what the parcel sizes are. You're seeing here, so it really varies. So there's a smaller parcel that's a little less than 40,000 square feet, all the way up to 190,000 square feet on the upper right. You can go to the next slide. This is the block to the north. So as you can see, it's actually the red circle should be a little bit higher up, but essentially the pathway network was conceived as being one east-west connection and two north-south connections. We looked at whether that was still feasible. So there is the new development, and they did create a pathway at approximate location in the Bergamot plan, which you can see there in the aerial image. So there is an opportunity to still provide a connection if the site to the south were to redevelop. That would potentially link to the north-south street network there. And then there's a possibility for another pathway a little bit further to the east if that larger site of 163K potentially were to get redeveloped where there's surface parking now. So just to give you all a sense as a basis for our discussion of what kinds of parcel sizes are we talking about, and are these pathways still potentially feasible to try to achieve? Next slide.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, these are really conceptual studies, even though they're very specific. They're showing specific properties. These are really just to give you an idea of what we're thinking about when we think about these pathways.
Exactly. Thank you, Stephanie. So in thinking about, okay, well, what would that mean? How would we get that pathway? What kind of square footage are we talking about? So the numbers highlighted in yellow represent 10%, or sorry, the numbers not highlighted in yellow represent 10% of the site. And in order to achieve a 20-foot wide path through the site, that's what you would need, that number highlighted in yellow. So we chose 10% as a starting point, so you get a sense of, okay, if there was a 10% ground floor open space requirement or pathways requirement, would that get us the pathway that we would need at a proper width? And so, so you can see here that the parcels on the left and the center parcel, 10% would give you the pathway width that you would need. And, you know, maybe we don't need to hit 20 feet, but, and then the parcel on the right, you don't quite hit that width if we were to go with 20 feet. So that gives you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about when thinking about potential requirements.
And we're thinking about, you know, how we can make these kinds of linkages and connections. Obviously, these are just lines on a Google map. They could move through the site in any way. The idea is that they would link up with other connections so that we could provide some permeability for walkability and bikeability, and even for servicing these larger developments.
Yeah, exactly. So just the final point on that is the idea with the circulation is potentially for people just living in Santa Monica trying to access the transit station, for example, or the arts center, or other activity centers within the area, places of employment. It gives them more options for walking. It presents an opportunity for amenitized open space. Here are some examples. The one on the left is more of a commercialized pathway. The one on the right is a fully residential pathway. So it can be done in different kinds of building typologies and different types of development. And the bottom center, again, a more commercialized type of pathway. And so when thinking about, oh yeah, back to you, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're wondering if having this as a requirement would make sense, and if we do have this as a requirement and it doubles as common open space, how can we make it serve both your services, fire lanes, and also have it as amenitized open space? So as Susan was saying, we've noticed that when we look at the parcel sizes, a 20-foot wide pathway would take about 10% or 12% of the site. If we were to require on the larger sites 25% open space, this 10 or 12% could be utilized for that common open space requirement. And then there would be additional open space throughout the project. So if this were to be a requirement, what would that minimum parcel size be to accommodate such a pathway? And then to sum up on the pathways, what we're thinking is that these larger developments would need fire lanes, service access. So as I mentioned, could they double as amenitized common open space, also serve as fire lanes, loading, etc.? Would they be feasible on lots 40,000 square feet or larger? Would it be possible to do one on a site that's slightly less than 40,000 square feet? Would it be possible that these pathways might be open to the public during daylight hours? And then we are going to run through some slides that many of you have seen in previous presentations. We've adopted some objective design standards for SB 35 projects. The council adopted those in December. These are still, we think, a work in process. We're thinking of pulling these standards over into the Bergamot area plan, at least as a point of departure, since we have some vetting from this technical advisory group, Architectural Review Board, and Planning Commission. So for common open space design is the requirement for social space necessary, and we would have cooking facilities, edible gardens, pools, spas, and we would incorporate one or more of the following amenities. And then here are some other aspects of common open space design. And we always want to check in with our development teams and affordable housing providers if these standards are usable and workable. We will be incorporating standards for residential unit entrances, because we anticipate from, especially what we heard from our last session with some of you, that that there is already enough commercial space in the Bergamot area plan. We definitely heard that. Some additional commercial space may be necessary as it develops out. We can talk about that a little bit later, but we understand that primarily if we have residential developments, there will be a lot of residential development at grade. And how do we make sure that that's walkable and that there are sufficient buffers from the street for those residents on the street? So, so requesting entrances and certain features like stairs or paving differentiation included in the development. We understand that many developments may have a single primary entry. We've heard that from our affordable housing developers. And then what requirements are necessary to still make those buildings open and pedestrian oriented at grade. We do anticipate some new commercial, potentially along Nebraska, which is one of the centers of the Bergamot area plan. And what requirements would we need for that commercial to also make that walkable and to make that commercial space viable? Some more about commercial entries. And then requirements for transparency. We know that there are lots of requirements for our development teams, fire requirements, structural requirements, and many buildings, especially if there were to be a maximum footprint, then there would every building has 4 or more sides. So how can we make the street facing facades as open and interesting as possible? And how much change in material and what is the ground floor going to look like? So here are some ideas for the standards that we might pull over into the Bergamot area plan. We have modulation requirements in the downtown community plan that we think have been very successful. We think that the developments that we've gotten downtown with these more flexible modulation standards have really worked well. And so we're anticipating using these standards as a point of departure as we look at modulation standards for these new residential and larger buildings in the Bergamot area plan. We understand that the fire needs if you're building on a property line, and in order to maximize light and air to the units and to have a multi-sided building requirement of at least 15% of the side interior building and a setback depth of 5 feet so that we could have some window openings. And here are some examples of modulation, some from our downtown and some from other places in the region. We're looking at pulling over the daylight plane requirement. That's been a requirement, a longstanding requirement that helps transition to a lower residential neighborhood. This would be required in just a small area of the Bergamot plan that does butt up to adjacent residential. And so we're also looking at this requirement and seeing how we could modify it so that it is more possible to get that in a development. The Bergamot area plan required roof line modulation. We are looking at a more flexible standard so that there's not a required setback or a wedding cake, but there's just a smaller percentage of development at the roof. The other areas could be used as common outdoor space. And here are some examples of roofline variation. Landscaping is very important in all common open space. We're hoping if we do get pathways through sites that they are landscaped to buffer adjacent residential and also to provide a common open space that's really lovely to be in and to walk through. And so what are the standards that would be sufficient landscaping that would be enhancing to all of the developments and foster a walkable environment overall? And so I'll just talk a little, because I know not everyone can stay for the entire 2 hours. I'll just touch on some of the next steps before we go back to the presentation and ask questions. Today is our first technical working group session. We'd like you to mark your calendars for April 18th. We will likely on April 18th talk about standards for taller buildings, and we will have study sessions with the ARB, Planning Commission, and Council. Our target adoption is to City Council on September 24th to meet our housing element requirements. And with that, I will end the slideshow. I'll keep sharing my screen because I would like to go back and start by asking you the questions that were in the slides to begin with. So,
and Stephanie, just to
yes,
take a
please.
moment, also if as you would like to, if you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand function. Our staff is monitoring that, so that's the easiest way, given how many people are on this meeting, to know who would like to speak next. So if you'd like to, as Stephanie's bringing up the questions, if you'd like to make a comment or provide feedback about that, then please use the raise hands function. And it's, if you're not familiar with Teams, it's at the top, I think, and it's got like a little hand, looks like that.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and it looks like now I can see you all, so that's really great. Okay, let me, there you are. Hello, everyone. Okay, so I hope you can still see my screen. And thank you, Leslie, for starting us off with the questions.
Am I allowed to talk?
Please.
I actually have two questions or two observations, and in general. I'm hearing that developers with with control of property in Bergamot are thinking of lot splitting so they have sites of 1 acre or less to avoid discretionary review by the city. So my first question is, how does that impact your open space and permeability objectives? The second question is, how much of what you're proposing could be done away with for density bonus projects that are allowed up to 4 concessions? And that may be something that takes more time to think about, but I know they get concessions from development standards as part of the density bonus.
I can address the density bonus question. So, you know, what's being developed here are development standards, and under state density bonus law, they would all be eligible for concessions, waivers, incentives, concessions, or waivers. So that's the answer to that
That's the
question.
answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of the lot splitting, I mean, I think, you know, if folks are doing that to avoid the discretionary review threshold, you know, that's one thing. But I think in terms of focusing on the open space, I think that's, you know, really what the question we're asking today, you know, is with respect to, you know, if there's an open space requirement, is there sort of like a minimum parcel size where that makes sense? We're talking about pathways, you know, ground floor open space. So, you know, I don't think we've landed on, you know, what an appropriate size is, right? That's part of this process, you know, that we are trying to gain feedback on.
Well, this
Yeah,
lot
and I
splitting
guess
is-
I'm sorry, Leslie. I mean, I would actually ask the question back to the development teams that if there would be lots splits and looking at these at separate parcels, how could a pathway requirement, because between those parcels, rather than having setbacks, maybe we can have the pathways, the amenitized pathways, rather than a setback requirement for each. So
Yes.
that's an interesting idea.
That's true. Okay, thank you.
Jeremy, I think you're next.
Yeah, hi, thank you, and love the presentation and the thought. A couple thoughts about some of this stuff. So with respect to open space, you know, I live in Ocean Park. I'm, you know, very pro-urban and understanding that we have a housing problem more than any other problem. And I frequent parks in Santa Monica quite often, and I will say we don't really have an open space problem. I haven't been at a park that's overcrowded in the city of Santa Monica. So I'm also a bigger believer in carrots rather than sticks. And, you know, the fewer requirements and the more incentives that we can provide, you know, not to say that a developer wouldn't want to provide open space, but maybe if they did, maybe there aren't any requirements. And if they did, they got some sort of benefit in the form of more density. And that could be a gradiated scale. And, you know, you could sort of right size and appropriately size the incentive. So to such a degree where there will be certain properties that will provide open space for additional density or some other benefit, right? Because housing is a public benefit, like to the city of Santa Monica, as is open space, as is other things, right? Just the pure fact of providing supply is a public benefit. I do think that there is, you know, for sort of good urban permeability and such, it is a good idea to limit the maximum sort of block sizes of things. And so, you know, with respect to these pathways and, you know, breaking up blocks and such, I think that, you know, what I've seen most often, the best utility is to sort of say like there's a max block length within some and also a gradient, you know, given to provide for unique circumstances, but a max block length of 350 feet or whatever it is. And then with that, you know, sort of a 40-foot or a 30-foot pathway. It gets challenging.
Jeremy, would a 35,000 square foot maximum building footprint be a challenge for you in your view?
Well, so I would actually say that there shouldn't be a limit. I don't really understand the logic as to why we would limit that. You know, when we look at like urban form and patterns and things that developers will produce, the market drives, like, you know, nobody's going to build something that is fundamentally flawed because there's too much money invested into these things to, you know, and they compete with each other. And so I don't really see a benefit of limiting building footprints or lot coverage or any of these things. Again, you could provide incentives, is sort of similar to the open space. You could provide incentives if you know, have 20% of your lot area committed to open space. You get to offset that density, you know, vertically on the remaining 80% of the lot that would be built. So I don't really see a benefit to artificially restricting building footprints, especially when you try to consider the future of like what is good urban form. Like, you want zero lot line stuff. You don't want these sort of, you know, re-entrant itinerant corners. They're not very safe. When you have too much break in sort of urban patterns, it doesn't really facilitate walkability and good street life, active edges, all these things. So I wouldn't limit that at all.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. That's really helpful. Ryan?
Yeah, hey, I would concur with a lot of what Jeremy said. From our experience as developers, definitely appreciate open space, and I live in Ocean Park as well, and having those pocket parks are definitely beneficial. But I think that, you know, having a plan where maybe there's dedicated pocket parks within the Bergamot and set those as sort of a dedicated open space rather than trying to create and carve up all these parcels with alleyways. And public safety is a big concern around those things. Anytime you have dark corners and a lot of you know, narrow alleyways, that is a real concern, I think. So consolidating it into maybe some pocket parks and predefined on certain parcels, and focusing on landscaping, I think would be a better use. On some of those setbacks that you mentioned, we've had a real hard time building those. In our experience, we had first of all, it creates a lot of drainage issues. So as it steps down, you have to drain the roof everywhere, and then it compresses your ceiling heights where those drains are because you have to drain below. So it compresses the ceiling heights in those units. That's something to think about. We also had a real hard.
Are you referring to this diagram?
Yeah. So you'd be draining every one of these patios that you're creating. The terracing is cool. It can be beautiful, but, you know, just thinking about roof drains, that can be an issue. We also had issues with life safety. So as you come down this, we've had to offset fire escape, or, you know, stairs for fire egress. And that becomes expensive and takes a lot of real estate away. So that can be a real challenge. I also, the maximum floor plate, I don't fully understand the logic. I mean, all these things, I mean, they're all good in theory and they're good ideas, but if you work with a block of clay and you carve it back as a developer, it would need to create window line. And we're really talking about a lot of housing production here. Office productions, you know, might be dead for the next 2 decades. We're not really sure, but so a lot of housing production, you're going to need to create window line, which will automatically create indentation and setbacks and things like that. And the more that the developer can play with that, you know, a larger block of clay and carve back as needed, the easier it is to make it work financially, make it work to fit more affordable housing. So all these things, it's a give and take of creating good architecture, creating good open space, planning that thoughtfully, without being too restrictive. So I would just, you know, from the developer side in our experience, just be mindful of those things. And that's coming from our experience. So that's all I got.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Can I add to the skyplane thing just real quick? One other piece. So I get the desire for skyplanes. and in particular, creating daylight access for streets and things. And to David's point, it does wreak havoc on plan efficiency because developers and architects end up developing sort of like an optimized plan that has a certain efficiency associated with the corridors and the stairs and everything else. And when you sort of reduce buildable or rentable area vis-a-vis step backs, it wreaks havoc on building efficiency. But the other thing about it is it really should be tethered to street widths and which orientation on the street it is. There's really no need to step back a building on the north side of a street because it's not overshadowing anything. So if the team decides to go this route, I would say that there should be considerations of street width. If they're wide streets, there's less of a need to do this. And if they are oriented in such a way that they don't place shadows on things, there's really no purpose to them.
Great. Thank you so much. I think Paula was next.
Thanks, Stephanie. I just wanted to back up for a second and say that I do appreciate staff's acknowledgement of the problems with the BAP being so prescriptive. And I do think moving towards the DCP model where we've seen it work, even on larger sites, is a huge step in the right direction. So we can continue to further refine and work, but I do think like we've actually seen this work. We've seen it work on large projects. We've seen it work on small projects, and simplicity is like a huge benefit. I think to Leslie's point, if you try to overregulate things, like they're just going to waive them anyways. So I think if staff could really focus on what's the critical ones. Only like remaining question on the open space is how that relates to like those prescriptive, the pathways is where I've like when we've diligence sites in Bergamot, it's like been very confusing to understand like what is being asked. Is it like an easement for public access? Like how does that even get it applied in an HAA protected project? And some of those pathways I think were done assuming other large sites would redevelop, which haven't redeveloped. And I'm just wondering if staff is also like re-looking at whether the locations of those pathways still make sense. And maybe this isn't the right place for the questions, but
no, those are great questions. I think we're hoping that we would get pathways through the project. We're hoping that there's a potential that they could be open to the public during daylight hours for the kind of permeability that we need. Because if we foresee, hundreds of units developing very quickly in Bergamot, we'd like everybody to be able to walk to the Bergamot station to get to wherever they're going. And so what makes that really comfortable for them, for the residents to walk? And if I'm a resident of one of the large projects, can I walk through another one of the large projects, right? So, or can I, take my bike or my Razor or whatever it is that I'm on to do that first mile, last mile to get to Bergamot, right? So, so that's part of the reason that we're hoping to plan for some connectivity. And make it flexible enough, incentivize it sufficiently so that we do get the permeability that works with each project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just my only follow-up is think about whether you guys want to use like additional affordable as like you can get more relief if you'll do 5% more affordable. And I don't know if it would make sense, but I just have heard a lot of, pushback that, once you do the 100% density bonus, how watered down the affordability is given. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to incentivize people to do more affordable with trade-off for more flexibility in any of these standards. I'm not sure, but it's just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, and Paula, I think just to add to answer your question about like, are these easements? No, we are not thinking about them as easements, which is why like we view this as a back and forth. I think, we understand the kind of box, if you will, we're in, just the constraints of state law being what they are. But I think, we're trying to posit forward, as Stephanie is saying, like this, this desire of, just the development pattern of this area, how can we incentivize it? Like, what would be a realistic set of standards that sort of balances, the constraints we're under, it works for the development, and, it works overall for, the community's needs. I think we're trying to find that win-win in here, and not create a set of standards that's unworkable. That's not our intent out of this.
Thank you.
Kara, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I kind of echo what everyone's saying, and especially what Paula started off with, the making the Bergamot plan closer to the DCP is going to be a good thing and very helpful. So a couple things I wanted to discuss or touch on. The open spaces with regards to those pass-throughs, I think they were on quite large lots. So I like that you want to connect the boulevards or the pass-throughs already, and I get that. So yeah, keeping some flexibility I think is a good thing, or just making it a point that you want to connect point A to point B, and however it's done, is up to whoever's developing it. But if we get into the open space, both the ground floor, I think it was the first couple of slides, the ground floor and this one, I think let's take, for example, this, I'm having most concerns with the smaller lots here. I know there are some lots that are, around 40,000 or maybe even less than that. And that's where I think we'll see a problem here. So on your second, or on one of the other slides, I think your required area for, no, it wasn't that one, but it was like you adjusted it. It was a parcel size of 0 to 40 or 39,999 square feet was required 8% of open space. I think you adjusted that to be
Okay.
the 25,000.
Yeah, so this slide, this would be if pathways are required, maybe this is the amount of space that they would be required for the pathways. That would be part of the open space, provided there was enough landscape and amenities to make it usable as common open space, if that makes sense. So we would still want, we would want an overall standard of common open space that's closer to what we have in the downtown community plan. So on a site of 80,000 square feet, we would want, 25% open space for that, right? So overall, we would want, 20,000 square feet of open space on a site that big.
Right. Okay. So let's, I guess, start with this one. For the sites of 40,000 square feet, I mean, that's small. So 15% open space here with a minimum open space or primary open space size of 6,000 square feet. That's kind of a large open space minimum, I think. And then if we go to that other chart you were looking at, I think the like 8% of a 25,000 square foot lot is 2,000 square feet, which that's, that could be manageable. But I think the minimum of 20 feet, well, I guess a 20 foot by 20 foot is fine, but I think you need to be a little, or look at the minimum dimensions or the minimum square footages, because especially on the smaller end of these lots, because I think there's going to be issues if, for example, on the first slide, you require a minimum of 6,000 square feet in one area. That's going to be tough. And then, potentially a minimum of 20 feet, although I know your courtyard minimums are 20 feet anyways, so maybe that's not an issue. But just looking at those numbers as they pertain to the smaller lots, I think is my biggest point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, you know, Leslie's comment at the very beginning kind of sticks with me, so that if we've got a site like this of 123,000 square feet, and that's being broken up into at least three sites, then how do you make sure that there's access through each one? If we don't have the kind of, we're not necessarily planning setbacks between each, right? So
exactly.
that's something to think about. What, you know, ideally we would have is a pathway between each site that's tree lined, that residents can, you know, move through the site. So then in this case, let's say it was broken up into three parcels, we would have, you know, three different sites with three different, or at least two pathways within the site, for example. And again, like, I know I'm always nervous when I point to somebody's property and start talking about it. This is all very conceptual. So I want to make sure to say that for the record. We're not, you know, this is not city property. So we're not sure what's going to happen with it.
Right, but
okay.
and to that, you know, hypothetical situation, if that 123 lot was broken into three different sites, your main priority, it seems, is just to connect those two pathways where the green arrow is. So if there was one parcel that was towards plan left, you know, do you need a pass through in that area? I mean, that's not a city priority at this time, so it may not be possible. That's all I have for open space at the moment. But one thing I did want to say about the step back comment that Ryan said earlier is we see the similar challenges when we're designing, especially with, like, you know, structure, shear, the egress stair. So maybe consider it more like you do some of the front yard setbacks, where it's like an average step back instead of like a straight plane. So, you know, you could maybe have a larger roof deck, which counts for a little bit more step back, and then maybe your stair could be right at the zero line. But if you have an average, that might be a way to be a little more flexible.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Kara, because you know, we have I think we have this in the code right now, figure 1. And this was a requirement when we were modifying the zoning code and implementing the new housing element that was very important to the decision makers. What we find is that developers are waiving that standard fairly consistently. So we were thinking, would a different angle on that make it more appealing, or not? But I think an average setback may be helpful. And I see Leslie nodding, so maybe that would make its way through Planning Commission. So thank you for that. It might be also a challenge to administer on a taller building. So that's the only thing I'm thinking of as I see the worried faces of my planning colleagues on the call. Okay, so I think did Sam, did you get in here?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
It seems the most important thing about your plan is that you have identified these walk passageways for both open space and for access. So some way you have to, I mean, especially in the big aggregate that that is the main portion, the 100,000 square foot parts of Bergamot, you've got to do something to make them you've identified them, to codify them in some way and make them easements or something like that, so that the individual developers just plug in their parcels to these walkways like you'd have a street. These are walk streets, basically. And you need to do that some way, otherwise it's going to be haphazard. That's my feeling. I'm seeing this, this is the fabric of Bergamot, is your walk streets. I mean, how are you going to do this? That's my question.
That's our question too. That's one of the things that we're trying to figure out, is how to, as you know, as we said in the beginning, this was the desire in the Bergamot area plan that was adopted almost a little over 10 years ago. And so how within new housing state law and incentivizing housing in the way that we want to, how do we write this? How do we make a standard that our developers will feel are friendly to them, that won't be waived, that we could actually realize, and in a way that's a street network and a walkability network that's not, as you say, haphazard. Like, that's the goal here.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, one of the challenge, I mean, really the challenge in Bergamot has been, you know, there isn't sort of like a master landowner. The city doesn't own, you know, a lot of land, like not in the area like north of Olympic, right? It's not, we have the art center and what have you, but there's just individual property owners. And when we're dealing with private property, as you're saying, like, yeah, it would be great if we could create the sort of like grid and these walk streets out of it, but that's private property, you know, and so that you'd have to pay them for that. Like, there's, you know, if that was to be advanced ahead. And so the idea in the Bergamot plan when it was adopted at the time, you know, was it would be through a series of development agreements where you can negotiate for those things. But we, you know, the rules have shifted substantially since then. So we're in the world of thinking about how to kind of unpack this puzzle and doing it in partnership with, you know, multiple property owners, and like, you know, what are the things, like, you know, as I come back to what is the win-win here, you know, that would make it attractive to provide these sorts of connections, you know, that work for the developer, you know, and overall it kind of benefits the community, you know, again, within the sort of, you know, box that we're in when it comes to housing projects.
Well,
we agree with the idea.
Yeah. But you've identified the pathways that you'd like. And if you could negotiate with the developers to plug in, if you're not going to buy them and make them easements, negotiate your way to seeing that these pathways are codified in the final plan somehow.
Well, this is that negotiation. So thank you, Sam. I see your hand, Ryan. I'm going to go to George Gleason to get him in.
Hey there. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of on this topic. If you go back to the map showing those larger parcels that we're talking about with these pathways. So, I mean, looking at this, you're going to have fire lane access anyway. And even if this was divided into 3, you know, or more parcels to get around the administrative approval or the discretionary review, you would be required to put in place fire lanes, ingress and egress to those parcels, which would naturally create this, you know, access that we're talking about. So, you know, if that's contemplated, I think, you know, landscaping, things like that can address those potential challenges. In fact, like breaking up these parcels into multiple sites to get around the discretionary review might actually, you know, help in terms of achieving more walkability because you have these fire lane access requirements.
Yeah, so
Can
I
I say
guess,
something?
yeah,
Can I just
go
say
ahead,
something,
Leslie.
Ryan?
Mhm.
I don't understand. I mean, we have a lot of buildings that are 4 or 5 stories, whatever, that are adjacent to each other without a fire lane between them. So I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. Hello?
I
think
think
Yeah,
another,
what I'm saying is you can't have a building in the middle, like if you took that 123,000 square foot site there on the screen, and it's got properties on both sides, it's landlocked. You have to have access to the middle of that site.
it's not
So,
just,
Or an
and it's,
alley, or an alley.
you're basically creating alleys, right? So it wouldn't just
yeah,
be
Yeah, big
fire
alley.
lanes. It's
Yeah.
also access to the garage, and then you're gonna need loading
Right,
docks,
right,
right, for
right.
deliveries, things like that.
Right.
So you're kind of naturally creating that desire that you have, and it's basically in the form of an alley.
Right.
Right,
Is
and
what I
I
was gonna
think
say.
what we'd like is for, you know, uh, yes, you will require service to your buildings. Can we make them look like that? And then fulfill your open space requirement. In part.
I mean, to that point, yeah, this is what I was going to say, something similar. I mean, if you need it for loading, right, and access to your garage, I'd say no, you can't, right? Because you're going to need to have some sort of alleyway and garage access. And how do you figure out, how the delivery trucks come in to deliver all the furniture when people move in and out? So I don't know how you're factoring the loading if it's just on the street. Normally, we like to see it in the alley. But if could you do it this way? I mean, one thought is like maybe you pick like your main corridor. It's like, and that's the give and take is, okay, how are all these buildings going to access the train station? You pick like a main corridor to do that. And then, you're still knowing that you're going to have these smaller alleys that are going to function more like delivery and access from that standpoint. And just one other quick thing on the setback. I had this exact condition on a building, if you wouldn't mind going back to that slide. Yeah, so what we ended up doing with the County of Arlington, and they had a very similar condition to this. What helps a lot is it's not degrees don't necessarily matter. It's the number of steps. So if you can just maybe do a 5 or 10 foot setback, 2/3 up the building or whatever you just deem necessary, that makes it a lot easier to design and build rather than a layer cake. Yeah, so down, we'll just, ideally just one step would be ideal, or, minimizing those steps would be ideal.
Great, thanks. Okay, Bob. Bob Taylor, you're muted. We still can't hear you. Bob? Bob, you're still muted. I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
There you go.
Okay, so in terms of separation and passageways and daylight, the one thing that really was touched on very briefly earlier was about shadow. The city of LA, for example, in their Oxford Triangle specific plan has a shadow ordinance. And while the phrasing of that is slightly different than we would have to do here, what it does is stipulate that there's got to be a certain amount of daylight out of shadow on any structure for a certain period of time. In their case, they talk about the summer solstice. Well, we know summer solstice, you got the sun directly overhead, so you're going to get daylight. But you spread that out over a 2-3 hour period that you cannot cast shadow on your adjacencies. That will open up those spaces, and that ties to height. So it's a way to codify this without saying you're limiting the height or you're limiting the width of the passageway. You have a 20-foot minimum passageway, I think I read, and I'm trying to get up to speed here, and of which a certain percentage only has to be to blue sky. And yet you're not going to get any shade or you're not going to get any daylight down on those areas for all that landscaping that you'd like to talk about. And an example of that is Wisconsin, where you have buildings within really 14 feet of each other from the balconies, and they're close to 75, 80 feet high. You're never going to get sun. So you need to work into this system somehow, a shade study as a mandate, as part of that codification, which will open up those spaces and increase the passageway. That's my comment on that. And you can look at that in the Oxford Triangle as a guide, if you will. I have one other question because it was prevalent in the
Bob,
Gels-
can I make a can I just respond to that for a moment? When we talk to the, I'm an architect also. When we talk to the Architectural Review Board, there's a lot of discussion about performance standards and focusing on sunlight and shadow. We'd really like to consider that. It's at some point we may be able to, but the concern that I have is that those standards may be very difficult to implement because they're different building by building. So
yeah, that's called creativity, right?
Right. It's so let us think about how we might be able to manage a requirement like that and have our planners, who are all extraordinarily busy, be able to properly implement that. I just want I want to make a pitch for performance standards, but also say that I understand the challenge with including them and implementing them.
Well, that's the beauty of architectural design. It's a challenge, and we all like it, and we try to resolve, but we want to keep in mind the livability, the human quality of this. And this is one way to approach that without those flat instructions. And also all of these standards that we're talking about should be stressed as minimums. It's nothing wrong with exceeding those allowable in spite of the state. I'm aware of the state mandates that have now been imposed, but I have one other comment as a question, because I saw it in the Gelson's project during the housing element, and the subsequent results from that is that anybody that's in this process of affecting ordinances, if they have a vested interest, they should reveal themselves as a what do you call it, a lobbyist now. If there's any contractual obligation, we saw that in Gelson's, ordinance would be pressed to be altered to suit that specific site. And that should not occur here.
I have a point of order. I think we've kind of gotten off the beaten track here.
What's the point of order?
That we need to focus on the standards that we're looking at today.
The Gelson site is not in Bergamot Station.
Yeah, so Bob, this is an open public meeting, and so we're inviting everyone. We all have our own, everyone on the call has an interest in being here, and we want to hear from everyone.
Well, I didn't say they shouldn't. I just said they should reveal. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Leslie, did you have something else?
I just have one actually reiteration of what you and Jing said. I think we need to all know, and we probably do, that we're living in a different statutory environment this year. We now have a state law that requires, it's basically a by right double density bonus. Mm-hmm. And that means a lot of density, and you would know that well, Sam. And with that double density bonus, meaning much bigger buildings, you get 4 concessions of development standards. You get to basically waive 4 development standards. So my suspicion is the pathway is going to be the first one to go, and probably the daylight plane will be the second, and I don't really know what's next. So what I'm saying, and I think what you guys are saying, is we need to incentivize including these important elements of the Bergamot plan and not incentivizing taking them as a concession. I'm not sure how to do that. Maybe the city gets involved financially in the pathways. City agrees to partially make, whatever the heck. There needs to be an incentive to doing this, because otherwise, believe me, they're going to ask for a waiver of that. I hate to be the the downer here, but that's sort of that's the environment we're all living in, and none of this comes to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we're focusing on this and on ground floor open space is to try to see how we can make such a requirement that is so necessary, as I think Jeremy was saying, that it is necessary to have cut-throughs in the project for service, access to driveways. We've seen those service alleys done well with landscaping and lighting so that they could double as common open space. We've seen it here in the 501 Broadway project. As you enter into Trader Joe's, the landscaping of that is fairly, lovely. We don't have a picture of that because it's not exactly the ideal that we would be hoping for, but it's certainly a start. And what we're hoping for is that we are able to use the information that you're providing to us and write a standard that won't get waived. I think there are some questions in the chat. I want to make sure that we get to them because I don't see any more raised hands.
Stephanie, I think they were addressed already. They were
okay.
Questions from the beginning. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for using the raised hand feature. I think that really helps us have a conversation where everyone gets in. But there are a lot of participants who haven't spoken up, so I wonder if there's okay, Corey, why don't you say your question out loud?
Oh yeah, not so much a question. I was just kind of agreeing to the way of potentially codifying these access pathways. Obviously, it seems very appropriate to define minimum block lengths that are very specific to the location orientation, because the city grid is already kind of predefined there, and the access paths are kind of located with that in mind. But I do believe it's very hard to understand how you would separate vehicular traffic with pedestrian traffic with these access points. Just by landscaping, I don't know if that's something that those can commingle. I guess that would be the biggest challenge in my mind as well.
Yeah, I guess what we're thinking of, and we understand that how the projects that we're seeing, the taller projects that we're seeing, naturally have some smaller footprints because every residence needs daylight, needs some access to light and air based on the building code. So we're thinking that if the 35,000 square foot footprint, which is still a pretty large footprint, makes sense, that might enable us to get a pathway through the buildings that would provide service and also some measure of open space if it could be tree lined as well. So I know we have a little bit more time together. Let's see, who haven't we heard from? Sam, you have your hand up.
No, I have a question nobody's mentioned. And I have a friend who owns a gallery in Bergamot Station. What are we doing to identify which pathway the galleries will locate in? Are we doing anything to support them? That's my question.
Well, certainly the Bergamot property, that's a city-owned property. That's a little bit outside this conversation, right? So what we understand that historically, this and the Bergamot area plan has envisioned this still as a center of the arts throughout the plan. I mean, those of us who went to SCI-Arc when it was in this location has a sense of the arts always being located here. So we will likely identify artist studios as a use that can go anywhere, and incentivizing, ground floor use of space, where we'll try to see how we can encourage live workspace, particularly at the ground floor, so that we make sure that there are spaces that artists can inhabit.
Okay.
Let's see. Anyone else want to get in here? Let's see who's here. Okay. I don't think we've heard from Anahit if she's here. Jason, I know you're taking this all in. Do you have any comments? Mario, I'm not sure we've heard much from you. I usually don't like to call on people.
Yeah, I can share just a couple of general thoughts. And I mentioned at the beginning that I serve as trustee, one of the trustees at New Road School, and since the adoption of the Bergamot area plan, the general approach was to kind of mix different uses within the same regulations, the same standards. And since I've been involved with the school, I have seen how the general division between residential and commercial really overlooks some very important needs of a school use, and that I would hope that would be a part of the discussion here. How would these things apply to both the redevelopment of an existing school site, and how would it apply to adjacent properties next to an existing school site? So that's one general idea. The second idea I wanted to put forward is that I heard the interpretation that with the density bonus from the state, that it really puts it in the hands of the developer how high a project will be. And if it's the case, if that is true, that in effect the city's height limit, the city does not have an ability to control height, then maybe the city's standards could reflect that fact and seek daylight for adjacent properties or even on the site by acknowledging that the developers may be choosing to go up, and perhaps the city standards could encourage greater height and greater spacing between structures, so that the daylight is achieved that way instead of through or in addition to the daylight plane requirement. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, okay. Well, Jason, I hope that you can attend in our next meeting, because we'll be focusing on standards for taller buildings, and your input will be really important. I'm not sure that I quite understand the use question. So throughout the area, commercial is will continue to be allowed. We may look at, let me go back to one of these slides, a map slide. We may look at certain places to focus some additional commercials, so that like in I'm thinking of Playa Vista development, there are certain nodes of commercial as all of the housing developed, and those are very successful and very necessary. But residential and commercial and institutional uses will be allowed throughout the plan. So one of the challenges, I think, with the live work model has been a building code challenge and not a planning challenge. So I'm curious as to the issue of use that you're talking about as it pertains to the school.
Right. And there may be school specific requirements regarding perimeter security, regarding privacy and the permeability for the structures that do or could in the future front the public right of way. I just as I look at how schools seek to use space and the potential public value of having some visibility into that space, I just question whether those standards truly should be applied to a school.
Okay, so that's really interesting. I am not on the board of Crossroads School. Crossroads School is also in the Bergamot area plan, and they inhabit, many different buildings within the Bergamot area plan that are not, without privates. There are the students use the streets for circulation. So I'm just curious, how would that be different?
Well, in this particular location where New Road School is, we're anticipating future development, well beyond 8 stories.
Right.
And so when we look at the future, what might the future redevelopment of the school itself look like? The campus is currently very exterior. The common areas, almost every space outside of a classroom is outdoors, and the school is going to have to reconsider that basic approach in the future. And so, and whether Crossroads will have to reconsider that as well, I don't know. I can't speak to any other school's situation, but it could potentially mean that outdoor space requirements might be something that even though that it's the school's current way of doing it, it may not be the best approach in the future if it's surrounded by 20-story buildings. So there are a range of things that the school is considering, talking about, that we would hope are reflected in these policies, and I would be happy to follow up with you to drill down in some of the details.
Yeah, I think that'd be important, because we may also be looking for the school. We may be looking at a completely different models that are used in in cities like New York and Chicago, for example. Okay, well that's super helpful. Thank you, Jason. let's see. Anyone else? I was hoping Anahit might want to make some comments, but maybe we'll follow up with you later.
Yeah.
Oh, here she is.
Hi, Stephanie. No,
Great.
I don't have. I've just been listening in. I don't have any comments right now. I'm sure Michael will later.
Okay, great.
Thanks for checking with me.
Okay, well, while you're all thinking about additional questions, why don't we talk about next steps? So again, please talk with us again on April 18th. Tell your friends and colleagues. We'll probably be focusing then on tall building standards because we see those coming in our applications, and we haven't so far addressed them in our code. We will have study sessions on April 15th. With the Architectural Review Board. We'll be also working with the Architectural Review Subcommittee on the objective design standards. Before then, we'll be going to Planning Commission on May 15th. If all is well, I know that seems like a far way away, but it's a pretty aggressive schedule in planning department terms. And then City Council on June 11th. So these are all the study sessions. And then we're hoping for a recommendation from Planning Commission on July 17th so that we can get to City Council adoption on September 24th. And for those of you who like to see dates in a more linear fashion, here are the dates in a different kind of chart. Let's see. Any other comments or questions?
Stephanie, this may be kind of a crazy question or scenario. Do you guys look at this area as like a 50-year plan of what would the city like to see as far as density? Do you imagine this place needs 50,000 units and 1 million square feet of commercial space? Do you kind of reverse engineer this district, or I guess
can take that
yeah.
question. So
Tell me more about that process.
Yeah, so I think as we said at the beginning of the presentation, I think I'll just go back to like the land use and circulation element, which was adopted in 2010, and that was the kind of looking at like general plan throughout the whole city, and it identified sort of these like particular areas largely on the spine of the expo line, that we would sort of do further study into, Bergamot being one of them. The other two were the downtown community plan and the Memorial Park station. So, Bergamot was this sort of, as we said, the idea was this like transit village, right? And it sort of grew from this idea of like this new train station, how do we kind of convert this area to encourage more housing? And, we are where we are today. And I think what's influenced the recent actions the city has taken, as I mentioned, to upzone for housing in this area was really driven by the housing element and the state's allocation requiring the city to plan for close to 9,000 housing units. And so that's what really drove this here. And this was an area where during the course of the housing element process, there was, because over the last 10 years, it really hasn't turned out perhaps the way, that it was expected to. And, as we've heard on this call, not that there isn't like any commercial interest whatsoever, but, really kind of it was geared towards a development agreement model and sort of treating housing and commercial projects and office projects all the same, right? So, I wouldn't say that we have, a target of some kind here. It's really, I think, understanding where we've been and understanding the kind of obligations that we have under the housing element, of what are ways that we can incentivize, housing in this area that hasn't worked over the last 10 years. And, we're responding to the feedback we've gotten from both property owners and community members of like, this plan is too difficult to understand. It doesn't provide enough, incentives for housing. The standards are too difficult to work with, all of those things. So I think it's driven, by sort of that response to the state, but then also then taking it that step further of if you're going to introduce housing to an area that, if you look at it now, right, it doesn't really have the bones or the infrastructure to support maybe the anticipated number of units, like look at the sidewalk widths, the streets, right? Are there amenities? Are there services there? Like none of that really exists in the neighborhood now. And then sort of thinking about it from that perspective. I will say, did we analyze, a certain amount for the area? I think in the loose, yeah, we did, but all of that has, like I said, not come to any any fruition, at this point. So it's sort of revisiting as we do with all our strategic plans of, this isn't working. What can we do differently, to try and achieve the outcomes that are benefit the whole community?
Yeah, and to amplify that, there was a vision for the Bergamot area plan to be to become a walkable community with shared streets, walking pathways, etc. And now that the zoning has changed to allow more height and density, we foresee the possibility of that happening more rapidly, or, because we haven't seen, as Jing has said, we haven't seen any development at all as a result of the Bergamot area plan, due to some of the complications of the plan. It's a very well-intentioned plan. So as we look at it and look to write new regulations for this area, we want to carry over that intent of a walkable mixed-use residential neighborhood and try to figure out how we can get that and also incentivize housing, have standards that won't be waived in the incentives and waivers that are allowed with housing development, so that we have a more cohesive neighborhood developing. We want to allow developers to have the freedom to do the housing that works for them, but we also want enough regulation so that it transitions to a walkable and beautiful neighborhood that people really want to live in.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that question. I think that allowed us a good summation and closing. If nobody has anything else, I think we might give this 15 minutes back to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Jane, and all of you.
Thank you so much for coming and participating and talking to us about this. These are really hard issues, and your feedback is super helpful to us.
Yeah, April 18th, we'll be delving into sort of talking about standards around larger buildings. So, really love to have you all back and others who would like to join. All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Stop the recording.